A wedding night should be a time of love and celebration. But for Zoya, it became a nightmare. The day before, she was a bride, dressed in elegance, stepping into what she believed would be a new beginning. But within 24 hours, her dreams were shattered. A secret she had feared revealing was now exposed, and the man she had vowed to spend her life with reacted in a way she never expected. Rage, betrayal, violence. What was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life turned into a terrifying ordeal. But what happened behind those closed doors? And how did Zoya turn her suffering into a brutal payback? Zoya had always known that revealing her truth could come with consequences. But she never imagined the person who once whispered promises of love would be the first to strike her down. Armand's reaction was immediate. His anger exploded the moment he discovered what she had hidden. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by fury. The walls of their new home, meant to shelter a love story, instead became witnesses to violence. No one heard her cries, no one stopped him. But this wasn't just about one night of brutality. This was about something far bigger: the deep-seated intolerance, the rigid expectations, the belief that someone like Zoya didn't deserve happiness. Was this the end of her story? Or was it only the beginning of a shocking revenge? Zoya was left battered, her body aching from the blows, but it was the betrayal that hurt the most. The man who had once held her close now looked at her with disgust, as if she were nothing more than a lie. But Zoya wasn't the only one facing judgment. When the news spread, the world took sides. Some called her deceitful. Others saw her as a victim of cruelty. In the eyes of many, she was either to blame or to be pitied, but no one expected what she did next. Instead of running, instead of hiding, she made a choice that would change everything. What happens when a woman who has lost everything decides to fight back? And just how far will she go to make sure justice is served? Zoya had spent her entire life hiding. In a world that refused to accept her, secrecy had become her shield. Born into a conservative Muslim family, she had learned from an early age that being different came with consequences. Rejection, isolation, even violence. These were the risks of living her truth. Despite the challenges, Zoya never stopped dreaming. She wanted love, acceptance, and the chance to live without fear. When she met Arman, those dreams felt within reach. He was everything she had hoped for: kind, charming, and, most importantly, unaware of the secret she carried. Their love blossomed in quiet moments, away from judging eyes. Long conversation, stolen glances, whispered promises of a future together. But even as she fell deeper, a shadow loomed over their happiness. Because Zoya knew, secrets don't stay buried forever. Arman had grown up in a household where tradition was law. His father, a respected businessman, believed in discipline, family honor, and the rigid roles assigned by culture and religion. His mother was devoted to maintaining their family's reputation, ensuring that Arman followed the path laid out for him, one that included marriage, children, and a wife who fit society's expectations. But Arman had always longed for something different. He wanted love, a connection beyond obligation. When he met Zoya, he found exactly that. She was unlike any woman he had known: intelligent, graceful, and with a quiet strength that drew him in. To him, their love was destiny. To Zoya, it was a fragile illusion. She wanted to tell him the truth, but every time she tried, fear silenced her. What if he left? What if he turned against her? What if love wasn't enough to overcome what she was? So she made a choice. She would wait. But the problem with waiting is that the truth always finds its way out. The wedding was a dream, at least on the surface. The ceremony was filled with warmth, laughter, and the promise of a new beginning. Zoya wore a traditional bridal outfit, her hands adorned with intricate henna, her heart pounding with both excitement and fear. For Arman, this was the moment he had waited for his entire life. Surrounded by family and friends, he saw his future unfold before him: a devoted wife, a stable home, and the respect of his community. In his eyes, Zoya was perfect. But beneath the jewelry and smiles, Zoya carried a secret that could shatter it all. She had spent years perfecting the art of blending in, of being what the world expected her to be. Every glance in the mirror reminded her of the risks she was taking, but for once, she wanted to believe in happiness. Maybe, she thought, love could be stronger than truth. Maybe, just maybe, she could hold on to this illusion forever. But love built on a secret is fragile. And in a marriage, the truth doesn't stay hidden for long. The first night in their new home should have been a celebration of love. Instead, Zoya spent it battling the fear that had followed her for years. Every glance from Arman felt like a test. Would he notice something? Would he sense the truth beneath the surface? She moved carefully, choosing her words with precision, keeping her distance when she could. But Arman was eager, affectionate, ready to embrace the woman he had married. He reached for her, expecting the intimacy that came naturally between husband and wife. That's when everything changed. A hesitation, a moment too long, a touch that didn't feel right. Arman pulled away, confusion clouding his face. His warm gaze shifted to something colder, something searching. He asked a simple question, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. "What's wrong?" Zoya's heart pounded in her chest. She had two choices: continue hiding or tell the truth. But before she could decide, Arman found the answer himself. And in that instant, the love that had once bound them shattered into something far more dangerous. The silence between them was suffocating. Arman's expression twisted from confusion to shock, then to something darker. His hands trembled, his breathing grew uneven, and then rage. "You lied to me," he whispered. But his voice was filled with something far more dangerous than betrayal. It was fury. Zoya tried to explain, to tell him that fear had forced her into silence, that she had only ever wanted to love and be loved, but her words barely left her lips before his anger exploded. He shoved her away, his face contorted with disgust. The man who had once sworn to protect her now looked at her as if she were a stranger. The betrayal he felt was consuming him, but for Zoya it was survival. She had spent a lifetime fighting for her place in the world, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. And as she braced for what was coming next, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a battle far greater than she had ever imagined. The morning sun crept through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the bedroom. But there was no warmth between them. Arman sat at the edge of the bed, unmoving, his fingers clenched into fists. He hadn't spoken a word since last night. Zoya stayed frozen, watching him, knowing that anything she said could set him off. The silence stretched, thick with tension, until he finally turned to her. His face was unreadable, his voice eerily calm. "Tell me it's not true." She swallowed hard. There was no point in lying now. "I never meant to hurt you, Arman," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was afraid." His eyes darkened. "Afraid of what? That I would find out who you really are?" He shot up from the bed, pacing, running his hands through his hair as if trying to wake from a nightmare. Then he stopped, looked at her, and in that moment she saw it: rage, betrayal, and something even more terrifying. A man pushed to his breaking point. The silence snapped. Arman lunged forward, grabbing Zoya by the arm with a force that made her gasp. His grip was iron, his fingers digging into her skin. "You made a fool of me," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "In front of my family, my community, my God." Zoya shook her head frantically. "Arman, please." But her plea was cut short as he shoved her backward. She stumbled, crashing into the wooden dresser. A sharp pain shot through her ribs, but she barely had time to react before he was on her again. A slap cracked through the room, followed by another. The world spun. Her ears rang. She tasted blood. Her vision blurred as she tried to push him away, to reason with him, but he was lost in his fury. Every word she spoke only fueled his anger. "You tricked me." Another shove. "You humiliated me." A fist this time, knocking the breath from her lungs. Zoya crumpled to the floor, gasping, her mind screaming at her to move. She had to get out. Now, but Arman wasn't finished, and the door was too far away. Arman's fury showed no signs of stopping. He towered over Zoya, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His fists clenched at his sides as if he were trying to restrain himself, but the hatred in his eyes said otherwise. "You disgust me," he spat. "You should have never—" Before he could finish, he lunged again. This time, Zoya rolled out of the way, her instincts screaming at her to move. She scrambled toward the door, ignoring the burning pain in her ribs. Arman grabbed her ankle. She kicked wildly, desperate to break free, and her heel connected with his face. He grunted, momentarily stunned, and that was her chance. Zoya crawled to her feet and ran. Her bare feet pounded against the cold tile as she bolted down the hallway. She didn't stop to think. She didn't even know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get away. Behind her, Arman's furious voice echoed through the house. "You think you can run from this?" Tears blurred her vision as she reached the front door. Her fingers fumbled with the lock, and then she heard him coming. The doorknob refused to turn. Her hands trembled too much, slick with sweat and panic. Behind her, Arman's heavy footsteps pounded against the floor. She could hear the rage in his breath, the venom in his words. "You think you can leave me like this, after what you've done?" A sharp yank on her shoulder sent her flying backward. She hit the floor hard, the impact rattling her bones. Arman loomed over her, his face twisted with fury. For a moment she thought this was it. Then bang. A loud knock at the door. A neighbor's voice called from outside. "Is everything okay in there?" Zoya's breath hitched. Hope surged through her chest. Arman froze. His gaze darted toward the door, his expression flickering between anger and fear. A scandal like this, his wife, his supposed shame, becoming public? Unthinkable. Zoya took advantage of his hesitation. With every ounce of strength she had left, she lunged, shoving him aside. She ripped the door open and ran. The morning sun burned against her tear-streaked face as she sprinted down the street. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just had to survive. Zoya ran until her legs gave out. Her vision blurred, her chest heaved, but she didn't stop until she was sure Arman wasn't behind her. She collapsed in an alleyway, her body trembling from exhaustion and pain. The bruises on her arms burned, but the wounds inside hurt far worse. For hours, she sat there, numb, afraid, and unsure of what to do next. Then she remembered a name. A whispered promise from a friend she'd once met. Someone who had told her, "If you ever need help, there's a place for people like us." With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and searched for the address. The LGBTQ+ support center wasn't far. By the time she arrived, the sun was setting. The small building was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, its walls painted in bright, welcoming colors. Zoya hesitated at the door. Would they turn her away? Would they judge her the way the rest of the world had? Before she could second-guess herself, the door swung open. A woman stepped out, her expression softening the moment she saw Zoya's face. "You're safe now," she said gently. "Come inside." The warmth inside the center was a stark contrast to the cold fear still gripping Zoya's heart. She followed the woman into a small, softly lit room where a few others sat. People like her. Some with kind smiles, others with weary eyes that had clearly seen their own battles. "My name is Aisha," the woman said, guiding Zoya to a chair. "You don't have to talk right now, but when you're ready, we're here to listen." Zoya hesitated. She'd spent years hiding, avoiding attention, fearing judgment, but tonight she was done being silent. With a deep breath, she told them everything. The room fell quiet as she spoke. The pain, the fear, the betrayal. It all spilled out in broken sentences and shaky breaths. When she was done, Aisha reached for her hand. "You don't have to face this alone. We can help." For the first time since the attack, Zoya felt something stir inside her. Hope. Aisha continued, "What Arman did to you is a crime. You have the right to seek justice." Zoya's fingers curled into fists. Justice. She had never imagined fighting back, but maybe, just maybe, it was time. The next morning, Zoya sat across from a lawyer in a cramped but welcoming office. Legal books lined the shelves, and a framed certificate hung on the wall behind the desk. "Your case is strong," the lawyer said, flipping through his notes. "You have physical evidence, witnesses, and the right to file charges under India's domestic violence laws. But," he paused, "this won't be easy." Zoya's stomach tightened. "Because I'm transgender." The lawyer nodded. "The legal system is still catching up. Some judges will sympathize. Others may see you as the one at fault. The media will get involved, and public opinion," he exhaled. "It'll be divided." Zoya knew what that meant. Some would call her brave. Others would say she deserved what happened, that she had deceived Arman, that she had brought this on herself. She clenched her fists. "I don't care what they say, I want to fight." The lawyer studied her, then nodded. "Then we fight." That afternoon, Zoya's case was filed, and within hours the story exploded. News headlines flashed across social media. Newlywed discovers wife's shocking secret. Violence ensues. Transgender woman seeks justice after husband's brutal attack. India was watching. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, and curious onlookers filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the woman at the center of it all, Zoya. She sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, refusing to shrink under the weight of 100 stares. Across the room, Arman looked different. The arrogance was gone. Instead, there was something else in his eyes, something that flickered between fear and defiance. The judge cleared his throat. "We will now hear from the plaintiff." Zoya stood. Her legs felt like lead, but she steadied herself. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She had relived the worst night of her life over and over in her mind. But today, she wouldn't be the victim. She was here to take back her power. She faced the judge, then the crowd. "Your Honor, I was attacked for existing, for being who I am." Her voice was strong, unwavering. "I didn't deceive Arman. I was forced to hide because people like me are not given the right to live in peace." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. But Zoya wasn't finished. She turned to Arman. "You thought you could silence me, but you were wrong." Arman's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client acted out of shock. He was deceived." Zoya cut in, her voice sharp. "Shock? Is that what we call violence now?" The judge held up a hand, signaling for silence. Armand finally spoke. "I was tricked." His voice was raw with frustration. "She lied to me. What was I supposed to do?" Zoya stepped forward. "You were supposed to love me, to see me as a person, not a secret." She turned to the courtroom. "But let's be honest. This isn't about deception. If I were a cisgender woman who had hidden a past relationship, no one would be calling this a crime. But because I'm transgender, suddenly I deserve to be beaten?" Silence. Even the judge seemed to absorb the weight of her words. Armand clenched his jaw. "You made me look like a fool." Zoya tilted her head. "No, Armand, you did that yourself." A hush fell over the room. The judge exhaled, looking down at the documents in front of him. "We have heard enough. The court will now deliberate." Minutes felt like hours. Then, "All rise." The verdict was about to be delivered. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked over the courtroom. "After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, this court finds the defendant, Armand Khan, guilty of aggravated assault." Gasps filled the room. Armand's mother clutched her chest, shaking her head in disbelief. His lawyer whispered something urgently in his ear, but Armand barely reacted. He just stared straight ahead, as if the world had collapsed around him. Zoya gripped the edge of the table, her heart pounding. She had won, but the judge wasn't finished. "The court acknowledges that the victim, Ms. Zoya Khan, was subjected to severe physical violence due to her gender identity. We recognize the need for stronger legal protections for transgender individuals. Therefore, the defendant is sentenced to 5 years in prison." Armand shot to his feet. "5 years? She lied to me." The bailiffs moved in, grabbing his arms as he struggled. "This isn't justice. She's the fraud." Zoya stood still, watching as he was dragged away. He had taken everything from her, her dignity, her safety, her trust, and yet here he was, refusing to take accountability. But as he disappeared through the courtroom doors, she realized this was the beginning of her real payback. Zoya stepped out of the courthouse, feeling the weight of the past few weeks pressing against her chest. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted her name, and the world watched as she took her first breath of freedom. Not just from Armand, but from the fear that had controlled her life. But this wasn't just about her anymore. Her case had become a national debate. News channels dissected every detail. Some called her a warrior for justice, a beacon of hope for transgender rights. Others, especially those clinging to conservative ideals, condemned her, claiming she had tricked Armand and set a dangerous precedent. Zoya didn't care about the noise. She cared about the young transgender individuals who saw her story and finally believed they weren't alone. With the support of activists and lawyers, she began pushing for stronger protections for transgender individuals. Her case led to public discussions about consent, identity, and domestic violence in ways India had never seen before. Lawmakers debated amendments to existing laws. Educational institutions started programs on gender sensitivity. Change was slow, but it was happening. Still, Zoya knew one victory wouldn't erase centuries of prejudice. As she looked out at the sea of people waiting for her response, one question remained. Had she truly won? Or had society simply taken its first step toward change? Thank for watch True Crime Family Story. Comment, like, and subs.